The last thing Victoria Bennett expected that night was to hear a stranger's voice beneath 30 floors of empty offices. The emergency lights flickered once before settling into a dull amber glow. Victoria stood motionless in the concrete corridor, her pulse quickening as she stared at the heavy security door that had just sealed behind her. A few minutes earlier, she had been reviewing quarterly reports in her executive office. Now she was trapped in the basement of her own corporate headquarters with no cell signal, no nearby employees, and no clear way out. She pulled her phone from her purse again and checked the screen. Nothing. No bars. No messages. No way to call for help. The silence felt unnatural. During business hours, the building housed more than 2,000 employees. But after 10 o'clock at night, the tower became something entirely different. Quiet. Empty. Almost forgotten. Victoria exhaled slowly and forced herself to stay calm. She was the chief executive officer of Bennett Technologies, one of the fastest-growing software companies in the country. She handled multi-million-dollar negotiations, investor crises, and boardroom conflicts every week. Getting stuck in a basement should not have rattled her this much. Yet standing alone beneath the city, surrounded by concrete walls and mechanical rooms, she felt surprisingly vulnerable. She walked toward the nearest service entrance and pulled on the handle. Locked. She tried another door. Locked again. The distant hum of ventilation systems echoed through the corridor. Somewhere above her, Chicago continued moving as if nothing had happened. Cars crossed intersections. Restaurants served late-night customers. Office towers glowed against the skyline. But down here, time seemed frozen. "Hello?" she called. Her voice bounced off the concrete walls. "Is anyone here?" No answer came. She continued walking, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The emergency lights cast long shadows across pipes and storage rooms. For the first time in years, Victoria felt completely alone. Then she heard something. Footsteps. Faint at first. Slow. Steady. Approaching from the far end of the corridor. Victoria stopped walking. "Hello?" she called again, louder this time. The footsteps paused. For a moment neither person moved. Then a calm male voice answered from somewhere beyond the corner. "You okay down there?" Relief washed over her so suddenly that she almost laughed. "I think I'm locked in." A few seconds later, a man appeared beneath the amber lights. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a work shirt with a maintenance badge clipped to the pocket. His expression was calm, almost reassuring. Not rushed. Not alarmed. Just steady. He glanced toward the security door and then back at Victoria. "That explains the emergency alert I got." Victoria blinked. "You got an alert?" "Building systems send notifications after hours," he said. "I came to check it out." He offered a small smile. "Looks like I found the problem." Victoria stared at him for a moment. In a building she owned, in a crisis she could not solve, the only person who seemed completely comfortable was a man she had never seen before. And neither of them knew that before the night was over, a locked basement would become the least important thing connecting their lives. Ethan Walker checked the security panel mounted beside the mechanical room and frowned slightly. "That is strange," he said. "The system shows the door should have reopened automatically after the alarm reset." Victoria crossed her arms. "And yet here we are." Ethan nodded. "And yet here we are." The response earned the first genuine smile she had experienced all evening. He crouched beside the control box, inspected several indicator lights, and tried a manual override. Nothing happened. The heavy door remained firmly locked. A moment later, his radio crackled to life. "Facilities to Walker. We are seeing a network fault across several access points." Ethan pressed the button. "I found one of them. Basement level 3. Static answered before the voice returned. "Understood. The vendor is reviewing the issue remotely. Could be a couple of hours." Ethan glanced toward Victoria. "Looks like we might be waiting." She sighed quietly. A couple of hours felt much longer underground than it did in a conference room. Ethan seemed far less concerned. He picked up a folding chair from a nearby storage area and offered it to her. You should sit. What about you? I spend most of my day walking around this building. Standing is practically a hobby. Another faint smile appeared on Victoria's face. She sat while Ethan leaned casually against the wall. Under the amber emergency lights, the concrete corridor felt less intimidating than before. Still isolated. Still quiet. But no longer empty. For several minutes neither spoke. The distant hum of ventilation systems filled the silence. Finally Victoria looked at him. Have you worked here long? Almost 6 years. 6 years? She repeated. That is a long time. Depends who you ask. He shrugged. My son thinks 6 years is ancient history. Victoria blinked. You have a son? Ethan's expression softened immediately. 12 years old. His name is Noah. The change in his voice was impossible to miss. The guarded maintenance worker suddenly sounded like a proud father. Middle school? Victoria asked. 7th grade. Loves science. Hates homework. Thinks pizza counts as a vegetable. Victoria laughed. That sounds about right. Ethan laughed too. The sound echoed gently through the corridor. It surprised her how easy the conversation felt. Most people spoke differently around her once they learned her position. They became nervous or overly careful. Ethan did not seem interested in impressing anyone. In fact, he still had no idea who she was. To him, she was simply another employee trapped in a basement. Oddly enough, Victoria found that refreshing. Upstairs, entire floors of the company carried her name on presentation slides and annual reports. Down here, she was just a woman sitting on a folding chair waiting for a locked door to open. What about you? Ethan asked. Family? The question caught her off guard. Most conversations in her life revolved around earnings, acquisitions, and expansion plans. Family was rarely the first topic. Victoria looked away briefly. No husband. No children. Ethan nodded without judgment. Must be hard sometimes. She stared at him. The answer was so simple. So honest. Not pity. Not curiosity. Just understanding. For a moment neither spoke. The emergency lights cast long shadows across the floor while the building above continued its invisible rhythm. Somewhere beyond the concrete walls, thousands of lives moved forward. Yet beneath 30 stories of offices, 2 strangers sat in unexpected stillness. And neither realized that the locked door keeping them underground was slowly opening another door either of them had expected to find. The minutes passed more slowly than either of them expected. Somewhere above, the city continued its restless pace, but deep beneath the tower, time seemed to settle into a quieter rhythm. Ethan checked his radio again. The response had not changed. The access control system was still offline, and the technicians were continuing their remote diagnostics. Any good news? Victoria asked. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Depends on your definition of good. That does not sound encouraging. It means we are still waiting. Victoria laughed softly and leaned back in the folding chair. For someone accustomed to controlling outcomes, waiting felt surprisingly difficult. Her entire career had been built on solving problems quickly. Delays were obstacles. Uncertainty was something to eliminate. Yet tonight there was nothing to manage, no meeting to lead, and no strategy that could unlock the door any faster. The realization felt strangely uncomfortable. Ethan seemed perfectly at ease with it. He sat on a nearby storage crate and looked down the long corridor illuminated by amber emergency lights. You know, he said, Noah would think this is the coolest thing ever. Victoria smiled. Being trapped in a basement? No. Missing bedtime because of a building malfunction. That is considered cool. At 12 years old, almost everything sounds like an adventure. Victoria found herself imagining the boy. She pictured messy hair, a backpack full of science books, and endless questions about how things worked. Does he live with you full time? She asked. Ethan nodded. Since he was 7. His voice remained calm, but something in his expression softened. His mother passed away 5 years ago. Victoria immediately regretted asking. I am sorry. Ethan gave a small nod. Thank you. For a few seconds, silence returned. The humming ventilation system seemed louder than before. Victoria expected sadness to appear on his face, but instead she saw something different. Gratitude. Not for what had happened. For what remained. He must be proud of you, she said quietly. Ethan looked down for a moment before smiling. Honestly, I hope so. Most days I am just trying to keep up. You seem to be doing more than that. He chuckled. That is because you have not seen me trying to help with algebra homework. Victoria laughed again, and the sound echoed gently through the corridor. The conversation felt effortless now. Natural. She could not remember the last time she had spent an hour talking with someone who wanted nothing from her. No promotion. No investment. No approval. Ethan simply listened when she spoke and answered honestly when she asked questions. It was refreshing. What about your job? He asked. You work late. Victoria hesitated. Comes with the position. Management? Something like that. Ethan nodded without pressing further. Most people would have asked for details. Most people would have searched for status. Ethan seemed more interested in understanding people than titles. As the hours moved quietly forward, either noticed how much the atmosphere had changed. The basement no longer felt like a place they were trapped inside. It felt like a pause either of them had realized they needed. And for the first time that night, Victoria found herself hoping the next conversation would last a little longer before the door finally opened. Another 30 minutes passed before Ethan's radio crackled again. He listened carefully, asked 2 brief questions, and then sighed. Victoria immediately noticed. Let me guess, she said. Still waiting. Ethan nodded. The access system reboot solved part of the problem, but not all of it. The technicians are coming on site now. Victoria leaned back in her chair and looked toward the ceiling. I have spent years running a technology company, and somehow technology is always the thing causing trouble. Ethan laughed softly. That sounds like something Noah would say. Your son sounds wise. Only when he is criticizing my cooking. The easy rhythm of conversation returned. Neither seemed in a hurry to fill every silence. The basement had become its own small world, disconnected from deadlines, meetings, and expectations. Victoria found that surprising. Normally, every minute of her schedule was planned weeks in advance. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, she had nowhere to be. Ethan stood and walked toward a nearby vending machine in an employee break area. A few minutes later, he returned carrying 2 bottles of water and a package of crackers. Not exactly fine dining, he said. But it is what we have. Victoria accepted the water with a smile. After today, this might be the most relaxing meal I have had in months. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That bad? She hesitated. Most people assumed her life was perfect. Expensive office. Successful company. Financial security. Awards. Recognition. Yet very few ever asked what it felt like. Sometimes success gets lonely, she admitted. Ethan listened without interrupting. People think the higher you climb, the easier everything becomes. She continued. In some ways it does. In other ways, it becomes harder to know who is being honest with you. Ethan nodded slowly. Because everyone wants something. Exactly. Her answer came faster than she intended. The truth had been waiting beneath the surface for years. Sometimes I walk into a room and wonder whether anyone actually sees me or just sees the position. Ethan looked down at the water bottle in his hands. That sounds exhausting. Victoria laughed quietly. It is. For a moment neither spoke. The amber lights reflected against the concrete floor. Somewhere nearby, a ventilation fan started and stopped again. The sounds were small, ordinary, almost comforting. Ethan finally looked at her. For what it is worth, You seem like someone carrying a lot more than a job title. Victoria felt unexpectedly moved by the comment. It was simple, genuine, free of flattery. Most compliments she received came attached to an agenda. This one did not. Thank you, she said softly. Ethan shrugged. Just calling it like I see it. Victoria studied him for a moment. There was something unusual about his calmness. Most people measured themselves by accomplishments. Ethan seemed to measure himself by responsibilities. By family. By promises kept. By people cared for. It was a different kind of strength. The kind that rarely appeared in annual reports but mattered far more in real life. Outside, the city lights continued shining above them. Inside the basement, two strangers from completely different worlds sat beneath amber emergency lights sharing truths they rarely shared with anyone. And without realizing it, both were beginning to trust someone they had only met a few hours earlier. The conversation drifted into a quieter place after that. The kind of place people rarely reached with strangers. The kind that usually took years instead of hours. Ethan finished his water and set the bottle beside the wall. For a moment he seemed lost in thought. Victoria noticed. What are you thinking about? She asked. Ethan smiled faintly. Noah. That was my first guess. He has a science fair this Friday. His eyes brightened immediately. He built a model of a flood-resistant neighborhood. Spent 3 weeks working on it. Victoria laughed softly. That sounds ambitious for a 12-year-old. Trust me, he thinks it is revolutionary. And what do you think? Ethan folded his arms. I think he worked harder on that project than most adults work on their careers. The pride in his voice was impossible to miss. Victoria found herself smiling. There was something comforting about listening to a parent talk about their child. The conversation carried a sincerity she rarely encountered in boardrooms. You really love being a father, she said quietly. Ethan looked surprised by the statement. More than anything. The answer came without hesitation. It is not always easy. Some days I feel like I am making everything up as I go. But every morning I get another chance to try again. Victoria lowered her eyes. Another chance. Ethan nodded. That is all most people need. The words lingered in the air. For reasons she could not fully explain, they touched something deep. Inside her. She had spent years chasing perfection. Bigger goals. Larger numbers. Greater achievements. Yet she could not remember the last time she had thought about life in terms of second chances. Success had become a race with no finish line. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Do you ever regret it? Ethan tilted his head. Regret what? Giving up opportunities because of family. For a moment he did not answer. The humming of distant machinery filled the silence. Finally he smiled. Not once. Victoria looked genuinely surprised. Ethan continued. There are things I miss. Certain dreams. Certain plans. But regrets are different. He looked toward the ceiling as though imagining another life somewhere above them. When Noah graduates someday, I will not remember the promotions I did not get. I will remember being there. Victoria swallowed hard. She thought about all the milestones she had postponed. Holidays missed because of meetings. Friendships weakened by work. Relationships that slowly disappeared beneath endless obligations. Somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that sacrifice always moved in one direction. Listening to Ethan made her wonder if she had been measuring success with the wrong ruler. Her phone suddenly lit up for a brief second before losing signal again. It was not enough to receive a message, but enough to remind her that the outside world still existed. Ethan noticed her expression. You miss it already? He asked with a grin. Victoria laughed. Maybe a little. That is honest. I am trying honesty tonight. Ethan nodded approvingly. Good policy. The emergency lights continued glowing softly above them. Hours earlier they had been strangers from different worlds. Now, sitting beneath concrete ceilings and mechanical pipes, they were sharing truths either expected to reveal. And for the first time in a very long time, Victoria felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. She felt understood. Victoria sat quietly for a moment after that. The words lingered longer than she expected. Being understood had become such a rare experience that she almost did not recognize it when it happened. Ethan was not trying to impress her. He was not offering advice. He was simply listening, and somehow that made every conversation feel more honest. The radio on his belt crackled again. This time the voice sounded more optimistic. "Walker, the on-site team has arrived. We should have the access system restored within the next hour." Ethan thanked them and clipped the radio back into place. "Looks like there is finally some progress." Victoria smiled, though she was surprised by her own reaction. A part of her was relieved. Another part felt unexpectedly disappointed. The realization caught her off guard. Just a few hours earlier, escaping the basement had been the only thing she wanted. Now she found herself wishing time would slow down. Ethan seemed to notice her expression. "You do not look as excited as I expected." Victoria laughed softly. "Maybe I got used to our strange little corner of the world down here. The luxury basement experience?" "Exactly. 5 stars for ambience. 2 stars for customer service." She laughed again, and the sound echoed warmly through the corridor. It felt good. Simple. Uncomplicated. Ethan leaned back against the wall and looked toward the ceiling. "You know, Noah always says life has a weird sense of humor." "How so?" "Whenever something goes wrong, something else usually goes right." Victoria considered that. "That sounds surprisingly wise for a 12-year-old. He would be thrilled to hear you say that." For a few moments they talked about Noah's science fair project. Ethan described the flood-resistant neighborhood model with such enthusiasm that Victoria could almost picture it sitting on a classroom table. Every detail mattered to him. Every small accomplishment. Every lesson. Listening to him, she realized something important. Ethan never spoke about sacrifice as if it were a burden. He spoke about it as if it were a privilege. The thought stayed with her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Have you always worked in facilities management?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No, what did you do before?" He hesitated. For the first time all night, he seemed unsure whether to answer. Victoria immediately regretted asking. "You do not have to tell me. It is okay." Ethan looked down at his hands before continuing. "A long time ago, I was an architect." Victoria blinked. "An architect?" He nodded. "Designed commercial projects. Mixed-use developments. A few large urban buildings." She stared at him in surprise. There was nothing about the calm maintenance worker sitting beside her that suggested a career like that. Ethan laughed softly at her expression. "That reaction is pretty common." "Why would you leave?" she asked. Ethan's smile faded into something gentler. "Because life changed." He did not elaborate immediately. He did not need to. Victoria understood. Some decisions were too personal for quick explanations. The emergency lights continued glowing overhead. The city moved above them. The locked door remained closed. Yet as Ethan quietly revealed another piece of his past, Victoria realized she was only beginning to understand the man who had found her in the darkness. And what she was discovering made her respect him more with every passing minute. Ethan looked down the corridor for a moment before continuing. "After Emily died, everything changed." His voice remained steady, but the weight behind the words was impossible to miss. Victoria listened without interrupting. She had learned enough about him during the night to recognize when something mattered. "Noah was 7, Ethan said. Old enough to understand what happened. Too young to know how to carry it." The emergency lights cast a warm glow across the concrete walls as silence settled briefly between them. "I tried doing both," Ethan continued. "Keeping the career. Being the father he needed. Convincing myself I could somehow balance everything." He smiled faintly. "Turns out there are only 24 hours in a day." Victoria nodded slowly. "So you chose Noah?" Every time. There was no hesitation. No regret. Only certainty. Victoria found herself admiring that certainty more than she could explain. In her world, every decision came with spreadsheets, projections, and risk assessments. Ethan had made the most important decision of his life with something much simpler. Love. You must have been very successful, she said. Ethan shrugged. Successful enough. That is not an answer. He laughed softly. Maybe I designed a few buildings people still use. A few? A few. The modesty made Victoria smile. The more she learned about him, the more she realized how much he left unsaid. Most people advertised every accomplishment they had ever achieved. Ethan seemed determined to hide his. You know, she said, most people would talk about that every chance they got. Most people probably worked harder than I did. I doubt that. Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with the attention. That reaction told her more than any resume could have. His identity was no longer tied to achievements. It was tied to values. To family. To showing up every day for the people who depended on him. Victoria thought about the executives she worked with. Brilliant people. Ambitious people. Yet many of them measured success by titles and compensation packages. Sitting beside Ethan made those measurements feel strangely incomplete. Can I tell you something? She asked. Of course. She hesitated before speaking. Sometimes I wonder whether I built a company because I wanted to succeed or because I was afraid to stop. Ethan considered that carefully. That sounds lonely. Victoria laughed softly. You say that a lot. Because it keeps sounding true. She could not argue with that. For years she had been surrounded by people and still felt alone. Tonight she was trapped in a basement with a maintenance worker and somehow felt less isolated than she had in months. The irony was almost funny. Ethan's radio suddenly crackled once more. This time the voice sounded much clearer. Walker, we have restored most systems. We are running final diagnostics now. Ethan thanked them and clipped the radio back to his belt. Looks like we are getting closer. Victoria felt an unexpected tightening in her chest. Closer to freedom. Closer to normal life. Closer to the moment this strange night would end. Yet she was beginning to realize something important. The basement had not only trapped them. It had stripped away distractions. No titles. No expectations. No carefully managed images. Just two people sharing truths. Beneath a building full of empty offices. And as Victoria looked at Ethan, she found herself wondering whether the most important thing she discovered that night had nothing to do with a locked door at all. The sound came suddenly. A heavy metallic click echoed through the corridor, followed by the soft hum of electrical systems returning to full operation. Ethan and Victoria looked toward the security door at the same time. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan's radio came alive once again. Walker, access restored. You should be able to exit now. Ethan smiled and stood. Looks like our luxury basement experience is officially ending. Victoria laughed, though the feeling inside her was more complicated than she expected. Ethan walked to the control panel and pressed the release button. This time the indicator light turned green. A second later, the doors slowly swung open. Bright hallway lights spilled into the corridor, replacing the warm amber glow that had surrounded them for most of the night. The sight should have felt like victory. Instead, both stood still for a moment. The outside world was waiting. So were all the responsibilities they had temporarily left behind. Ethan finally stepped forward. After you? Victoria nodded and walked through the doorway. The contrast was immediate. The office hallways looked exactly as they always had. Clean. Quiet. Professional. Yet somehow they felt different now. They rode the service elevator back toward the main lobby. Neither spoke much during the ride. Not because there was nothing left to say. Because there was too much. When the elevator doors opened, the lobby was nearly empty. A few overnight security officers stood near the entrance. Several members of the facilities team were reviewing maintenance reports. Life had resumed its normal rhythm. Ethan checked his watch and smiled. Good. I might still get a few hours of sleep before Noah wakes up. Victoria laughed softly. The science fair architect needs his rest. Ethan shook his head. Trust me. The real architect is 12 years old. They walked together toward the glass entrance doors. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to color the Chicago skyline. The streets were quieter than usual. The city seemed caught between night and morning. Victoria stopped near the entrance. For the first time since leaving the basement, she looked directly at Ethan. There is something I should probably tell you. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounds serious. Maybe a little. She hesitated, suddenly unsure why the words felt difficult. Then she smiled. I am Victoria Bennett. Ethan waited. Okay. As in Bennett Technologies. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then understanding slowly appeared across his face. You are the CEO? Yes. Ethan blinked once before laughing softly. Not the shocked reaction she expected. Not the nervous response she usually received. Just genuine amusement. That explains a few things. Victoria found herself laughing too. Most people react differently. Most people are probably smarter than me. No, she said gently. I do not think that is true. They stood together beneath the early morning light. For the first time all night, every title was finally on the table. Every truth had been revealed. Yet nothing important seemed to change. Ethan was still the same man who had offered her a folding chair and a bottle of water. Victoria was still the same woman who had shared her loneliness beneath emergency lights. The honesty remained. The respect remained. And as the city slowly woke around them, Victoria realized that the most valuable thing she had found during the longest night of the year was not freedom from a locked basement. It was meeting someone who reminded her what genuine human connection felt like. 1 month later, the gymnasium at Lincoln Middle School was louder than any board meeting Victoria Bennett had attended in years. Students hurried between displays. Parents carried cups of coffee while pretending not to worry about the judging results. Folding tables filled the room from wall to wall, covered with inventions, engineering models, scientific experiments, and handwritten presentation boards. The atmosphere was imperfect, chaotic, and completely alive. Victoria stood near the entrance holding a visitor badge. She looked slightly out of place in her tailored navy coat, yet she did not seem to care. For the first time in a very long time, she had come somewhere with no agenda. No investors. No presentations. No quarterly targets. She was there because of a promise. Across the room, Ethan Walker was helping Noah make a final adjustment to his flood-resistant neighborhood model. The 12-year-old was explaining drainage systems with the confidence of someone presenting a billion-dollar proposal. Ethan listened with the same attention he had given him every day of his life. Victoria smiled as she watched. Some things could not be measured by spreadsheets. Ethan noticed her first. His expression immediately brightened. You actually came. Victoria laughed. I said I would. Noah looked up. Dad, is this your friend from the basement? Ethan looked mildly embarrassed. Apparently that is how I am going to be introduced forever. Victoria extended her hand. Nice to finally meet the famous scientist. Noah shook her hand enthusiastically. Dad told you about my project? He talked about it for hours. Noah grinned. Good. It deserves hours. Ethan laughed and shook his head. The warmth between them felt natural. Easy. As if they had known each other much longer than a month. The judging process continued throughout the morning. Victoria found herself genuinely fascinated by the students' creativity. More than once she caught herself imagining what the future might look like if people invested in curiosity, as much as they invested in profits. By early afternoon, the winners were announced. Noah did not take first place. He earned second. For a brief moment disappointment appeared on his face. Then Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. You built something amazing, he said. That matters more than a trophy. Noah nodded. A few seconds later he was smiling again. Victoria watched the exchange quietly. She realized that Ethan had been teaching resilience without ever using the word. It was simply how he lived. After the event ended, families gradually drifted toward the parking lot. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the school grounds. Victoria and Ethan walked together while Noah hurried ahead to tell a friend about a future project. "Second place," Victoria said. "I think he handled it well." Ethan smiled. "He is learning." "From his father?" Ethan shook his head. "Mostly from life." They stopped near the edge of the parking lot. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. The kind that existed between people who no longer needed to impress one another. Victoria looked toward Noah in the distance, and then back at Ethan. "You know, getting trapped in that basement might have been the luckiest accident of my life." Ethan smiled. "Mine too." The answer came easily. Honestly. Around them, the afternoon continued like any other ordinary day. Yet both understood something had changed. Not because one person rescued the other. Not because a locked door had opened. But because two lonely people had been given a second chance to be seen, understood, and valued for who they truly were. Sometimes the most important rescue is not escaping a place. Sometimes it is finding a person who reminds you that grace, dignity, and hope still exist. And for Ethan and Victoria, that door had opened long before the basement ever unlocked.